Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we're going to be talking about the Smith & Wesson Model 4006, as well as the history of the 40 S&W cartridge. This all begins with a shootout in Florida, where several Asians, FBI agents, were killed with their stick shooters while they were being attacked by guys with automatic pistols and Mini 14 rifles. And the FBI decided they needed to rearm to cope with the modern criminal that they were dealing with, and they wanted to switch over to semi-automatic pistols. Oddly enough, the cartridge that they looked at was the 10mm auto, and the model 1006, I believe. It was one of the Smith & Wesson model 1000 series. The one they were looking at actually had a decocker only. It did not have a manual safety. They liked the power. They liked the wounding ballistics. They liked the penetration. They liked everything with it. But there was one Achilles heel to it. And that was the fact that, first of all, the guns didn't hold up very well. And second of all, their agents had a very difficult time shooting them. The recoil was tremendous. They had difficulty with follow-up shots. It just was too much gun for a duty-type pistol. So they went to work on the cartridge to tame it down. So they went from a 180 grain projectile going over 1,300 feet a second down to the same weight projectile at just under 1,000, or at 1,000. And that became the 10mm light, which eventually became the 40 S&W. Now, the 40 S&W development was a joint effort between Smith & Wesson and Winchester. So what we see here is a model 4006 pistol. This was the pistol that was designed along with Winchester to develop the 40 S&W cartridge. And around 1993 or 1994 was a time period where it was released for the public at the SHOT Show. The first rounds that came out in the 40 caliber cartridge or 40 S&W cartridge was the Winchester silver tip projectile and also the full metal jacket, the 180 grain full metal jacket. But this is where it got interesting. The first pistol to be released was not the pistol that it was developed with. The first pistol to be released by, I believe it was about a week or so, was the Glock Model 22. At the time, Glock was working on the Model 20 and 21. Well, they had seen the popularity or what was going to happen, or what they thought was going to happen with the 40 S&W cartridge. They immediately stopped and went to their Glock Model 17, scaled it upwards to chamber the new cartridge, which basically all it meant was a new slide, new barrel, and they made some reinforcements on the locking block, or they had what was called the first pin or the third pin, and they got it right out. Now, the interesting thing about both the Glock and the Smith & Wesson, the Smith & Wesson came out second. Both of these were originally 9mm caliber pistols that were scaled upwards by means of modifications to a slide and a magazine and a barrel to make it shoot the more potent 40 S&W cartridge, which was interesting. Now, we go a little bit further. The first two pistols that were developed specifically around the 40 S&W cartridge were the Sig Model P229 and the HK US P40. These two pistols were designed around the 40 S&W, and then they were scaled downwards for the 9mm cartridge. For instance, the USP, you first had the USP 40, and then when it went to the USP 9, they had the slide. They removed material to decrease the weight of the slide, so it would now function reliably with the 9mm cartridge. The same thing was done with the SIG P229. The SIG P229 with its stainless steel slide replaced the Model P228, and you had the Model P229 9mm. If you were to flip the slide over on the 9mm, you would see where material was removed to lighten the weight of that slide. So I wanted to give you sort of a history of what pistols came out first, which was interesting because it wasn't the Smith & Wesson which you would have thought of. The cartridge was nearly an immediate success. You had had manufacturers started manufacturing it. Federal came out with some, Remington and Spear making some of the more popular ones. And one of the first cartridges that really took off with it was the evil flesh-seeking Winchester Black Talon cartridge. Now, as some of you may or may not know, that was pulled from the market, not for legal reasons. It was voluntarily by Winchester due to the fact that there was complaints that the bullets were doing unnecessary damage. If you take a look in here close, you can see these sharp talons on the end, and you can also see the black finish. This is actually a bronze jacket. It is not a copper jacket, so it's much stiffer. You can see one is larger than the other. This here was a 180 grain. This was a 165 grain. Now, the reason for these talons on here was so when the bullet would go into a body, as it would open up, the talons would grab a hold of tissue and damage. Now, the only way you stop a target is to damage tissue, and that's what these were designed for. Surgeons were complaining that they would go in to remove the bullets. These would tear apart their latex gloves, which you wouldn't think somebody would be sticking and pulling a bullet out with their fingers. You'd be using some kind of a tong or some kind of a device to pull these things out. So, due to the bad press, Winchester voluntarily withdrew that from the market, even though that it was extremely popular, and it was re-released as the Ranger line for law enforcement. And the SXT nomenclature was originally Supreme Expansion Talon. Then they released the new SXT for commercial called SXT Supreme Expansion Technology, which basically what it does, it got rid of the black molly coat and they got rid of the sharp talons. So it was the same projectile, but it did not look as evil. But it was still available to law enforcement for purchase on their Ranger line. The next one that was really, really popular with law enforcement was the Federal Hydroshock. The Hydroshock had been in the .45 auto caliber, that was the round, for comparison, that was the most popular .45 round probably ever put out. Recently, I think its technology was surpassed by the newer HST line. The next one that has been very popular was the Spear Gold Dot. Now you have the Gold Dot 2. In my time in forensics, working especially out in the Milwaukee area, Wisconsin area, the majority of the police departments out there had Glock 22s, and they had the 180 grain or 155 grain Hydroshock, or they had the Gold Dot. I would say the popularity of the Gold Dot certainly overtook that of the Hydroshock towards these later years. But those are some of the more popular. Again, when you look at the 10mm versus the 40 S&W, again, you're looking at 1,300 feet a second versus 1,000 foot a second with the same weight projectile. So you can see there's a significant amount more power that's in there. So now we're going to take a look at the Smith & Wesson pistol. I've never been really a fan of Smith & Wesson automatic pistols. However, there was something about the 40-06 that I've always admired, and that was the fact that it was developed with a 40 caliber cartridge. So we're going to talk about this pistol specifically. What we have here is a complete stainless steel pistol. A stainless steel frame, stainless steel slide. Then you have a good ordered steel barrel. This particular model has the Novak type sights on it. This also came with a adjustable sight. I preferred the one that was fixed. You had a very unpopular magazine disconnect. Now, the magazine disconnect was always controversial. You had some police departments that liked it and some that didn't. Going back in time a little bit, the Smith & Wesson 9mm was used by the Monroe County Sheriffs in Rochester, New York, where I was from. And their firearms training unit, they were quite fond of the magazine disconnect because they had felt that if there was a time where a police officer got into a scuffle, if he was to drop out his magazine, his pistol could not be used against him. Well, the City of Rochester Police Department, in the same area, they did not think that was a good idea. They did not want to have the officer being incapable of firing when he was changing magazines. However, they wanted to have the safety. They kept the safety on. When the Monroe County Sheriffs carried this gun, they carried it with the magazine safety as well as having manual safety on. And it had actually gotten some officers hurt because when they went to pull their gun out to shoot, they didn't take the safety off and they didn't have that critical time that they needed. So there was a way to disconnect the magazine release safety if you so chose. It was not something that Smith & Wesson armors liked to teach you, but they did because there were people who wanted it. The magazine was a stainless steel magazine as well that held 11 rounds. With the slide-mounted safety, you had the decock. When it was in decock, it also disconnected the trigger bar from the trigger, so there's no way the hammer would go back. You flip the safety upwards. Your first shot was that long, drawn, double-action pull, and then you would have your single-action pull. So you could carry it also decock with the safety engaged. And of course, if you had the magazine, you drop the magazine out, the safety is engaged, it will not fire. For disassembly, you would pull back the slide just enough so that the slide stop can be pushed forward. You push inward, as you can see, that can be pushed forward with a projectile. Pulled out. And as the slide moves forward, it decocks. Flip it over. Move your recoil spring and your barrel. All the Smith & Wesson barrels of that time, the 59 series, 69 series, 10 series, 45 series, all had the caliber right over the hood of the barrel. As you can see, Smith & Wesson, it was always a very, very high quality. The issue with this pistol was the 59 series was used in the XM9 program and did not fare very well for durability. However, these pistols were very, very well made. Looking at inside of the frame, you can see here you have your ejector. Here you have your decocker. And here you have the lever for your firing pin safety. And of course, this is the 3rd generation series pistol, which all had firing pin lock safeties. And again, it was just a very hefty, it was a hefty pistol. It was a very well overbuilt pistol. However, for the 40 S&W, it was a good thing. At least in my opinion, it was a good thing. Now, the 40 S&W, there's a lot of departments who used the 59 series or the 9mm series. And after the 40 S&W came online mainstream, you would see a lot of the 9mm being traded in for the new 40 caliber series. Smith & Wesson did quite well with the 4006 series. However, once the SIGs came along and the Glocks came along, the Glock pistol was less expensive. So Glock already had a heads up, for the market. And as time went on, the Smith & Wesson sort of fell from grace. You saw Glock taking over the 40 S&W market. SIG made an excellent pistol, but it was cost prohibitive. However, the 4006 was used with several police departments. It was the California Highway Patrol. There were several other ones. The SIG would go on for use in several federal law enforcement agencies, ATF, FBI. In fact, the Secret Service uses those still to this day, but they use them chambered in 57 SIG caliber. These H&K, unfortunately, never did very well because of the cost. It was an excellent pistol, but it was extremely expensive. When it originally came out, it was supposed to be the $600 and under to compete with the Beretta SIG Glocks pistols. And it did very well those first few years, but like anything else H&K, as time went on, they got away from that and they went back up in price. So now you can't touch one for less than $800 right now. So you figure $800 today was probably like $1,000, 20 years ago when it came out. Now, all 3 pistols that you see right here are still modern combat pistols. They're still modern law enforcement pistols. The Smith & Wesson has just sort of gone away. Smith & Wesson discontinued the 40 series or the entire Hammer series around 1994 or so. Is the introduction of the Smith & Wesson Sigma series, which was their copy of the Glock 22 pistol, which didn't fare well for Smith & Wesson for 2 reasons. 1, the pistol was plagued with mechanical problems, and 2, they were sued by Glock for patent infringement. And Glock 1 got royalties and got punitive damages. In fact, there's a wing of the Deutsche Wagram plant in Austria of Glock that they call the Smith & Wesson wing, where it was paid for. Now, the Sigma went on to have some more enhanced versions that did make them better, the SWV, SWVE, and eventually came the M&P series. And the M&P series was a complete overhaul of the Sigma. They were 2 totally different pistols. The M&P was a much better designed pistol, and that pistol brought Smith & Wesson back into the law enforcement market. There was a time period in there between the adoption of the 40 S&W and the introduction of the M&P, where Smith & Wesson was very much at a low. After law enforcement got rid of the revolvers, they did not have the market share that they once did. And their auto pistols, this series here, it never did as well as the other 3 pistols that you see here. That's not true. It did better than the HK USP, and it wasn't because it was a better gun, because it was less expensive. Smith & Wesson also put out a Model 411, which was a black with an aluminum frame that was much less expensive. That had a lot of, I worked in a gun shop at the time, and it did quite well for as far as commercial sales. They also had an aluminum frame version with the stainless steel color with the stainless steel slide, which did which also did well. They also had a version that was double action only, which some of the police departments did look at. But it holds a much bigger place in history in the development of the cartridge than I think it ever did in its use. Reassembly, very simple. Drop the barrel back in. Insert your recoil spring. You had to be careful. You had a very small oval notch in here where this thing's set into. If you didn't get in there quite right, your recoil spring would go flying across the room. For reassembly, we have the hammer in the forward position. slide on. We're going to push downward on the ejector. Now we're going to push downward on both the firing pin safety lever as well as the decocking lever. Pull back to that very same location we used for disassembly. Insert your empty magazine. You can do a function check on it. Decock. Pull the trigger double action. And we're good to go. What we're going to do now is we're going to take the Smith & Wesson 40-06 out to the range and we're going to fire a few rounds. As previously stated, I felt that the significance of this pistol was far more in its development with the original 40 S&W Cartridge with the Winchester. The pistol never did as well as any of its predecessors, the Glock Sig or the H&K, but it holds that position in history as the pistol that was designed in conjunction with Winchester on the 40 caliber pistol. I have to say this is probably the only Smith & Wesson semi-automatic pistol that I really have ever really liked. I was able to get this one on Gunbroker. It was actually the first gun I ever bought off a Gunbroker. But I've been looking for one of these for many, many, many years. Never really took the plunge. I can remember the first exposure I had to this was probably around 1995, 94. I went to the armor school at Smith & Wesson, at the Smith & Wesson Academy. That was the gun that I had worked on. So I was fortunate to get it at a reasonable price. I do enjoy shooting it. It's definitely my favorite of all of the Smith & Wesson pistol lineup. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please click like, please subscribe, even better, share. Thank you.